In the real world, it doesn't take strength or extraordinary abilities to make a hero. The real supermen and women are set apart by something else. Courage, like the courage to tell the truth when others want to sell the lie, or to stand up for what is right when others want to do what's wrong. This is what our country needs right now, more than anything. So forget the capes and secret identities. We need regular Americans to step forward. This is the Renew America movement, and we're calling all heroes.
Good afternoon, folks. If you're on the East Coast, almost into the afternoon. If you are on the West Coast, we are excited for you to join us today. We have a special edition of our RAM Chat today to talk about the exciting announcement from the Renew America movement of the list of renewers that we have released. So before we jump in today, I want to introduce myself and the other guests that are here with me. My name is Miles Taylor. I'm one of the co-founders of the Renew America movement, and really excited to have this conversation with Governor Christine Todd Whitman, who's on the screen here. The governor, many of you know, has been very active in our rollout of the Renewers, had also served as the administrator of EPA during the Bush administration, and is a noted conservative intellectual and a champion for the public good. And I'm thrilled to also include Joel Searby here today. He is the National Political Director for the Renew America movement, and a storied political hand and operative, and also a civic leader in his own right. So thank you both for joining today. Before we get too much into the details and talk about these renewers and what it means to be renewers and the details of our announcement, Governor, I want to go to you and ask where we're at in this fight for our democracy, and why a group of us even needs to come together in the first place to say we need to reach across the aisle to protect our democracy from extremists. Where are we at in the fight, and why are we doing this?
Well, Miles, thank you for the introduction. And we are in a fight. There's no question about that. We see again and again these lawsuits being put forward still to try to overturn the 2020 election. We see laws being passed in states that would take away the oversight and administration of elections and put it in the hands of partisan legislatures. And then we see the members on Capitol Hill who seem to support all these things, support the big lie. And we need to get away from that. We need to get what this country thrives on, where we do well, is when we have a center left and a center right party. And that's why it's so exciting to be part of this effort, because what we're doing is calling on Republicans, when your choice is between an extreme right Republican and a centrist Democrat, vote for the Democrat. And for Democrats, if your choice is an extreme left Democrat, vote for the Republican. We need to get people to understand that our country and our Constitution is more important than party labels. And that's really what Renew is all about, and what we're doing with the release of this list.
Now, before we put the list up, Joel, I'm going to ask you a question, but I want to give a lead in here, because the video that kicked us off today, the theme was calling all heroes. And I've got to say, from a personal perspective, growing up, my dad used to tell me, I'll go back further. My first boss once told me, don't meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you, which is an old adage, right? Because, you go meet your heroes and you find out that they're flawed. And my dad used to always tell me, no, meet your heroes, because then you can see their flaws and find out where you can do better. And I think that's something that at RAM, we really believe is that we do have real life heroes out there. They may be flawed, but get to know them and let's figure out where they fell short and where we can do better. And one of the reasons that we're endorsing candidates around the country is we want these people to be the human heroes in the fight against extremists. Yeah, everyone's going to have flaws, but we've got to look past some of those partisan differences and recognize that we need to work together to get this done. So, Joel, if you could, before we look at that list and who's on it, maybe give us a sense of what went into the consideration behind who RAM was going to endorse around the country. What's the electoral strategy here?
Well, thanks, Miles. And first and foremost, we believe that the reality of this cycle is that the outcome of elections could, can, and will have a significant impact on the future of our democracy. And so first and foremost, we looked at races where we could make a difference and where it really mattered. And we picked candidates and current elected officials who have really tough races, oftentimes against extremists. But also not just that, where we can make a difference, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but also races where these candidates have stood up for what's right, for what's true, for our democracy. Again, as the governor alluded to, we don't all agree on everything. There's a spectrum here, but we can lay aside some of those, again, agreeably important policy issues, but focus on fundamental things. I mean, we have fundamental issues related to our democracy, not the least of which is who's telling the truth. And so we've looked at candidates and others who will tell the truth, have told the truth, have a track record of doing that, but also who are not extremists. These are great candidates, as you'll see in a few minutes, who have really worked hard to do the kinds of cross-partisan coalition building that we so badly need in our government.
Well, let's do this. Let's put the list up on the screen and keep it up there for a minute or two while we talk about some of these names here. If you lean into your screen, you should be able to get a sense of the folks that we're endorsing. As Joel noted, this is a combination of people who are, good unifying Republicans that Ram believes should be protected in the re-election races, people who stood up against things like the big lie and efforts to decertify our election, people who put country over party. Also, some unifying pragmatic Democrats who were encouraging folks to support against political extremists that will be running against them. And notably, we have an independent candidate we're going to talk about here in a second. But before we do, I want to encourage folks that are watching, feel free to add questions in the comments section. We'll try to get to some of your questions in the course of this conversation. I'm going to ask a few, and we're going to have some back and forth discussion here, but we'll go through the list and answer your questions about this list and what we're trying to do here at the Renew America movement. So, Governor, while we keep these candidates up here on the screen, let me ask you, when we chose these folks, in your mind, what qualifies someone as a renewer in this really divisive period of time in our politics?
Well, you basically said it, Miles. It's people who put the country ahead of their political party, who will stand up against lies, who will reach out to the other side and support those who are under enormous pressure to go with leadership, let's say, and support an extreme position. These are people that have had a history of wanting to get things done for the public. And that's why we got to how we got to where we are today, because Congress had been so dysfunctional. People weren't working together, and they weren't working and making decisions on the big issues that really affected the public. And people felt they were being ignored, overlooked. They were worried about the future, and they saw Congress as being totally dysfunctional. And so they looked for a disruptor. Unfortunately, they chose one who also for whom the Constitution is an inconvenient document and the rule of law just doesn't apply. And none of the norms that have protected our democracy apply. And they've gone down a rabbit hole with him that it's very dangerous to the future of our democracy. And if we look at our history, we know that, no form of government, particularly not a Republican, Democratic Republic, has survived forever. But I don't think any of us are willing to give up. It's not our time now. We want to hold on to this extraordinary form of government that we have. And we can only do that when we have the kind of people in who respect the Constitution and the rule of law.
Well, Governor, you mentioned a divider who maintains sort of a Darth Vader-like chokehold on the Republican Party. We all know his name. Some know him as the former guy. Others know him as Donald Trump. And, Joel, I want to put a question to you. A number of folks have asked, it seems like Republicans in Congress are still so committed to following Trump. And a lot of Republican voters, people in our party are still so committed to following Trump. Is that going to stymie our efforts to push out political extremists? And how do we deal with Trump's grip on the Republican Party going forward?
Well, certainly Trump is incredibly influential and powerful in the core base of the Republican Party. But as I mentioned, and now we're getting a little bit deeper into this, for those that are watching, you get a little bit of the strategy here. These are a lot of races where these are going to be won by 2 to 3%. And so we know, as a matter of absolute fact and data, that there are millions of Republicans, former Republicans, independents who are they may be center right, they may be very conservative, but they do not support either the big lie or Trump's approach. And so we are very well positioned as an organization to go out and talk to those folks, to reach them. We have an incredible advisory board of former Republican members of Congress, cabinet members, governors like Governor Whitman, and many others who have credible voices in the Republican communities, and we can go in there and talk to those folks. So we're not saying that we're going to come in here and break the fever dream that is the Trumpism, but we can come in and make a difference in races where it really matters, and that is our strategy. That is what we're going to do, and I think you're going to see us have a lot of success in that. That is our focus. This is not. As I was telling Miles this morning, this is not patty cakes. This is a political organization who is bent on winning elections. We believe that's one of the most important things to breaking the fever of Trumpism is to beat Trumpist candidates where they rise, and so we intend to do that.
And Joel, I said tiddlywinks, but then you reminded me that was an archaic game, and very few people would know what I was saying if I said we're not playing tiddlywinks on this end. So we'll go with patty cake, but. And I'm going to ask you a question in a moment, Joel, about one of the really unique faces on here and one of the independent renewer candidacies. Before I do, though, I know that we've got a number of folks asking this question, whether it's in the chat or other viewer questions that we've gotten throughout the day about whether we're trying to start a third party right now and whether there's any hope of actually restoring the Republican Party. So, Governor, I want to go to you with that question, because when we first came out publicly earlier this year and launched the Renew America movement, we did issue a threat. We said that we are, people in the Republican Party at the grass tops who are giving the party a warning that if it doesn't reform itself, we may seek its replacement. But we're not quite there yet. So what do you say to the question about can we restore the Republican Party, and are we currently trying to start a third party?
Well, I'd say first and foremost what you just said. We are not trying to start a third party at this moment. We are trying to reform the Republican Party, and that's why we put out a list of these 10 Republicans who are worth supporting. Because the problem has been, as we well know, that those who are willing to stand up against the big lie, against the Trumpism, undermining our faith in our electoral process, no one's had their backs. We are going to have their backs, and we are enlisting others to recognize that and to support them because it's worth it. They're standing up for the party. And to the extent that we can change these electoral outcomes, ensure that these people get reelected and aren't overthrown by extremists on the other side or within the party in the primaries, then we can start to get a Republican Party that's based on some of the principles that the party used to stand for. Respect for the rule of law and adherence to the Constitution, those basic things. So that's the whole point here. We are trying to move the party back to the center. And in the future, we will also be releasing a list of challenger candidates, of Republicans who are not in office, but are ones who will stand up, who have said that they won't support the big lie, who understand the importance of taking that oath of office to the Constitution, not to their political party. They're Republicans, but they're willing to do what they think is the best interest of the country as a whole. And so that list is going to be every bit as important as the current list going out when we do that, and giving people a chance to see there are these Republicans, and if we elect them or protect them, if they're current office holders, we can start to rebuild the party from within, and that's our hope.
Well, Governor, that's actually a good teaser. I mean, this list right here on the screen, these are the renewers. And in a couple of weeks here, we're going to be releasing a list of the dividers, the most divisive anti-democracy members of Congress that we're going to be calling on you, the folks who are supporters of this movement, to help us go out there and defeat. And that's coming quite soon. Joel, I teased we were going to go to you on one race in particular, but I'm going to pull moderator's prerogative and answer one of the questions that we've gotten. And there's a question about whether we want to see the Republican Party regain control of the House and the Senate? And that's a really difficult question, because someone like me, who's been a lifelong Republican, who's worked in that chamber, who's wanted to see Republican majorities, recognizes that right now, the most important issue has got to be protection of our democracy. And our party attempted to overturn a free and fair democratic election. And because it hasn't reformed, it's not qualified to retake the majority in the House of Representatives. And that is one of the overarching political goals of our effort at Renew America in this cycle. It is to deny Kevin McCarthy the Speaker's gavel. If Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, it won't be his hand wrapped around the gavel. It will be Donald Trump's hand. And that's what we're worried about. And it pains me to say it. I used to work closely with Kevin McCarthy and his team when I was working in the House of Representatives. But I don't trust the direction that they've gone. And one of the reasons why we're supporting this group of Democrats and Republicans is we think these members of Congress can help tilt the balance of power away from the McCarthy cohort. Now, in the Senate, there are some folks in our universe who would like to see a Republican Senate to balance out a Democratic House of Representatives. It's our position that a divided Senate right now is better than a Senate that's in clear Republican control, given how much pressure Trump and his allies have put on the Senate, previous Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. So it's not a comfortable place for a lot of Republicans to be in, but that's why we're urging folks to join us, do the hard thing, and help protect our democracy. We're not Democrats in sheep's clothing. A lot of us are again, Republicans, but at our core, conservatives who believe in free minds and free markets and free people and believe that the party's gone astray. So now's the time for us to team up rational Republicans with patriotic progressives and to make this happen. But Joel, we've been talking about Republicans and Democrats. That's not the only story here, because there's really unique things happening in our politics. And I want to give one stat that the governor and I used this morning on Morning Joe that will feed into one of the candidates on this list. And that is 50% of Americans now say they are neither a Democrat or a Republican. About half the country now says they are politically an independent. That's the largest number, I believe, that the Pew surveys have ever recorded. That's significant, is voters are saying they're done with the parties. They want to see independent candidates that stand for our institutions and our first principles. So, Joel, we do have one of those folks on this list, and that may grow. Can you tell us a little bit about that candidate and why this is significant?
Yeah, thank you, Miles. I want to start by saying I'm a guy who, if you don't know me, I've been working for the last 6 years to try to chart this new way in our politics, particularly among independents. And I've worked very hard. I've run U.S. Senate candidates as independents, governors as independents. It is an incredibly difficult, if not impossible, task. It's not impossible. Governor Walker of Alaska was an independent governor and a fantastic one. But it is very, very difficult because of the way that our system works. However, there are a small number of places where, because of a great partisan imbalance, and that's the one I'm going to talk about now, the opportunity to run an independent and coalesce a truly cross-partisan group of people, a group of voters, does exist. And one of those places is Utah. Many of you know Evan McMullen, who was a former candidate for president and co-founder of Renew America, who has since moved into a different role so that he can run for U.S. Senate in Utah against Mike Lee. And that is a unique state that, while it is a quote unquote red state, it is like the rest of the country. There are huge numbers of independents and many disaffected Republicans who are very concerned about the direction of the country, just like all of us who are on this call are. And so, Evan is a tremendous candidate who is off to a really great start in Utah, who launched his U.S. Senate candidacy last week. And I think you're going to see a couple of other independents who will get into the fray at a variety of levels in the coming months. But there are some specific opportunities where that can work. And where it doesn't, we're not going to be unrealistic. We're going to support pragmatic Democrats. And I saw one of the questions in the feed that I just want to comment on because it's related. Are you going to build a coalition government as we've seen in, say, Europe or Israel? And the answer basically is yes. I mean, we're not the ones that will govern, of course, but there is a vision here that by shaking up the current makeup of the House and potentially the Senate, you could see a situation where many more partisans will cross those lines in order to build unique coalitions that have tremendous power and hopefully power for the good in rebuilding and reclaiming our democracy. And that's a really important part of this.
Joel, you bring up something really interesting on coalition government, because what we're calling this right now at this stage is coalition campaigning. We're advocating for something pretty novel, and the McMullen Senate race in Utah is a great example of that. It's a state where Democrats have not won statewide in decades and have no hope of winning the Senate seat against a pro-Trump extremist like Mike Lee. But there is a chance for the Democrats to align behind someone like Evan McMullen and also disaffected Republicans who are tired of Mike Lee and Trumpism to get a real independent into the Senate. And this is a model that I want to urge you all is not a one-time deal. We are actually in conversations with a number of candidates around the country, folks who are, well-known names that are considering doing exactly what Evan is doing in different races around the country. Now, this is an experiment in coalition campaigning, but an important one if we're going to protect our democracy, is figuring out how to team up with the other side to get a good person to take out a radical. So, Governor, I want to ask you another question, that I saw here in the chat just a second ago. It says, beyond defending these renewers, what are our plans when it comes to supporting primary challenges to some of the worst and most dangerous members of Congress, people like Madison Cawthorn and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert? I know you mentioned that we are coming out with a worst of the worst dividers list, but what would you urge folks to do when it comes to those individuals, and what will we do as Renew America?
Well, I think one of the things we're going to look at as well is who the challenges are, where we can make a difference. I mean, there's some districts where it just is not, we're not going to make the difference. It's going to be in a primary. We could in a general perhaps, but probably not in a primary, although it's worth going after those that we can, if we think we can, if the margins have been close enough in the past. But right now it's to get people to understand who their choices are, who their incumbents are, and to stand up when they start to come back at them with their far extreme views and push back and look for those alternative candidates that they can support. Even if we're not going to play in every race across the country. That's not something we're in a position to be able to do. We're going to go where we think we can actually affect the outcome. But we don't stop there as far as urging all of you on the call and everyone else to keep looking for these opportunities. And if we're not there, you go there. There are a lot of people that have responded to our op-ed saying, what can I do? Well, what everybody could do besides support Renew America is to watch these candidates and is to get out there and tell people what their alternatives are, what these candidates stand for if they're on the extreme, why it's better to vote for the other party if your choice is somebody who is so extreme that they're not going to try to make government work, that's not their interest. Their interest is to go to the extreme and to ignore the guardrails that we have always had around our democracy that has kept us strong.
We've got another good question in here from someone that's not terribly far from you, Governor. Paul Moore in central New Jersey and the eastern Pennsylvania area asks, what can I do locally at a grassroots level? I know you answered that, Governor, especially when it comes to what folks can do at the ballot box. Joel, I'm wondering, in the lead up to Election Day, what are we going to be asking folks to do on the ground when it comes to these renewers?
Yeah, we have a lot for you to do. You'll be hearing from us if you're following Renew America Movement. If you're not, make sure you go to renewamericamovement.com, sign up so you can get updates. Also, you can reach out to us via our social channels and otherwise to let us know. But in the races that we've targeted here on your screen, if you live in one of those districts, we want to hear from you. We have a full-blown plan to roll out into each of these districts, not just normal political mechanisms like spending on advertising, but to build a real grassroots group of people, including many Republicans who can speak credibly into these races and say to their fellow voters, we need you to vote for this Democrat in this seat, for example, or to support this Republican in this seat. And so we're going to need your voices to be involved in that. And we definitely want you engaged to the point of what are we doing in the primaries? It's related. We're in touch with a lot of folks. I just want to give you a little bit of inside baseball. We are talking to people in a lot of the seats that were mentioned already. You may or may not see some candidates come out in some of those seats, but we know that there is a keen interest in those primary seats in making sure that those real radical folks are challenged. And where we can make a difference, we will go in there and play. There's a lot of other great questions here, but one I wanted to also just
Can I just add something to what you just said,
Yeah.
which is for those in districts, you may not live in any of the districts of the renewers that we've identified today, but you probably know people who do. Reach out for them, get them to get on the RAM site and to support these candidates. But also let's remember, there are a lot of local elections going on for mayors and for local councils. There are going to be some extreme members there. Watch in your local. You can be the eyes and ears for RAM on the local level to build this coalition out, because as we have seen, the extremes were pretty smart. They started working on local elections a long time ago. So they were able to then get control. And now as we move into the whole process of redistricting, a lot of the more extreme members of the parties control that process. So I would urge also that people continue to look at their local elections and where they see people who are not going to be working in the best interests of their community, to point them out and point them out to their neighbors as well, and get involved.
And I'll just say we want to stay in our lane. To those that are asking if we're going to be in other races, we absolutely want you to do exactly what the governor just said. You can get involved. You can certainly put those things on our radar screen. There's very important races at like county clerks who manage elections, secretaries of state. We're in touch with folks who are working on that stuff, and we'll be sharing as we can those networks so that you can get involved in those races, perhaps at the statewide level. But we also believe that it takes a little bit of focus here to make sure that we don't get so bogged down in trying to do too much that we fail to take care of our initial task here, which is to save democracy at the federal level. And we really feel that it is that urgent. Somebody made the comment of politics is the domain of Chicken Little and the sky's always falling. And of course, you hear that kind of stuff every single cycle. This is the most important election of my lifetime. And I'm not going to use that phrase, but I will just remind us how absolutely different this time is. It truly is. We have never seen what we saw on January 6th, other than in times of war. We have never seen the kinds of absolute stranglehold on the truth that a single man and a movement can have. This is a really important election, and we need to stay focused as an organization on doing what we can to protect the House and keep the Senate in a healthy spot.
We have another question in the chat from Julie Meyer Wright, who it's now a little bit disappeared from my screen, but Julie, we're asking about whether we're paying attention to and engaging with the third party efforts that are happening around the country. And there are a range of them. I mean, many of you have seen in the news that former New York mayoral candidate and former presidential candidate Andrew Yang has launched something that he calls the Forward Party. There's the Common Sense Party out there. There's a number of efforts to start third parties. And while Renew America movement is not starting a third party right now, you know, we're trying to restore a common sense coalition in Washington and bring those folks together, whether they're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or a third party candidate. We want to reinforce that pragmatic core. That doesn't mean that we're ignoring what's happening with third parties. In fact, we're actively engaged in some of those conversations. And in the long run, as a movement, I would say this: we are heavily committed to bringing more choice and competition into our democracy. Now, that's not a talking point. I actually think that that's the single most important task for us as a country in the next 100 years, is to reform our laws and our political system in such a way that democracy gets competitive again. Because what people have gotten frustrated by is the big party monopoly, or more accurately, the big party duopoly over our politics. It's really hard to start a third party in a lot of places around the country, and exceptionally hard for those third parties to be successful. That the founders designed a country where competition and choice were supposed to prevail, not just in the economic marketplace, but in the political marketplace. And that's something that we want to try to facilitate. What does that actually look like? That means investing in reforms like ranked choice voting around the country, getting rid of partisan gerrymandering, breaking down some of these legal barriers to the establishment of third parties, and making it competitive, opening up primaries so people can participate. These types of reforms are things that are actually starting to happen around the country. This isn't a pipe dream. This isn't a far out fantasy. This is real world, and we're starting to see this emerge in different places, experiments in these changes, and it will inject that additional competition into our system that will give us, frankly, better and more choices for public office. So we are investing in those efforts, even if we right now ourselves are not presently launching a third party. And look, we're excited to see that. There should be more entrants into that field, and we'll be cheering them on. So, I also see other questions in here in the chat about whether we're taking positions on federal voter reform to set standards on voter reform. And I believe that was also a question from Julie Meyer-Wright. I'd be interested, Governor Whitman, in your thoughts on where we're at on voting rights. Our membership and our advisors are very active on defending voting rights and looking at voting reform, and curious to get your thoughts.
Well, I think you said it. It's our members we as an organization right now, as Joel said, are trying to stay in our lane to make the difference where we can in the elections. But, I was co-chair of a policy commission on the rule of law and democracy, and with Preet Bharara. And we came out with 2 reports on what we needed to do to protect our democracy, to protect the rule of law, to protect our voting and our government. And we need to go back at those. They were incorporated in a lot of those changes in HR 1 and S1 in the Senate. They were. So those things are out there. We need to be sensitive to them. We need to really watch what's happening in the states where they are taking away the oversight and administration of elections from secretaries of state and putting them in the hands of partisan legislatures, where what they'll do is they'll just toss out every vote of the candidate that they don't support. And we're really talking about Republicans doing this. It's been Republican legislatures, and they haven't even been subtle in the fact that this has nothing to do with any wrong that they saw happen in 2020. It is purely partisan. It is, in Arizona, they took it away from the Secretary of State, who is a Democrat, put it in the hands of the Attorney General, who is a Republican, for 2 years. And then it goes back to the Secretary of State because they think they can win that Secretary of State race. And they're sure they can. And I want to tell you, had that race been in the hands of the Attorney General, or the legislature, can also go to the legislature, they would have just ignored all the accurately cast ballots for Joe Biden. They just would have disenfranchised a whole lot of eligible voters, and we just can't let that happen.
I want to go to a comment that's now past my screen, but Daniel mentioned something about politicians, especially in the Republican Party, not really standing up and speaking the truth because they're afraid to lose their jobs. And, this is a really worrying thing that we see in our politics right now, but it actually goes beyond that. And the governor and I have had conversations about this. One of our worries is that the GOP civil war has gotten so hot that it's gone from a figurative GOP civil war to kind of a physical one. And physical intimidation has made sort of an alarming entrance into the discussion within the party. And I, of course, can give a recent example of Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who reported that after she took her vote to impeach the president, she faced death threats. She had to take on a full-time security detail. And other members of Congress told her they would have voted differently, but they were worried about the safety of their families if they took the vote that they thought was right. That's pretty concerning. Joel, Governor, would love to get your thoughts on that, and how we get away from this environment of physical intimidation and get back to free and open discourse and civil disagreement.
Well, it goes deeper than the members of Congress. We're losing a lot of those who have overseen and ministered our elections in the past, who are just doing their jobs, who have been threatened. Their lives have been threatened. Some of them have had to move houses. And people are resigning. They say, this is not what I signed up for. I can't do this to my family. And that's going to really hurt us. We're losing a lot of that institutional knowledge that is so important to be able to have free, fair, and accurate elections. So we need to take these things extremely seriously, and we need to stand up and say, this is not right. This is not the kind of government we are. And that's why it's so important to support the candidates who who are willing to stand up and push back against this, because no one has had their backs up till now. They are afraid because there's been no one to say, well, we'll help you, we'll support you. And that's what we're trying to do, I believe. Joel, your thoughts?
Absolutely. We are here to not only have the backs of those candidates, but hopefully create an entire network of people who are there to support them, not just in our organization, but a grassroots network, as well as consultants and others who can help them be successful. But I want to comment on the violence thing, Miles. As somebody who personally experienced it, not as an elected official, but in 2016, our independent presidential campaign had a number of death threats. We also had to hire private security, had very credible, serious death threats. And we've only seen that increase. I mean, Representative Gonzalez just announced in Ohio that he would not seek re-election after having been heckled and threatened everywhere he went. We've heard that from anyone who has primarily opposed President Trump. Of course, there are hecklers on the left as well. We've seen much less of that in these years. It's really been about those who believe that if you go against the current trajectory of the Republican Party, that is Trumpism and the big lie, that you are not only to be disrespected, but you should be made to be afraid for your life. And this is the kind of dangerous political, not just rhetoric, but real threats that we've seen, unfortunately, in other countries who have begun to unravel. And we have to do what we can to push back against that. And one of the things we can do, we can't provide security details for everyone, but we can, as a movement, make sure that these people that are standing up know that we support them. And so that's one thing you can do if you're on the call here. People are asking a lot of questions, what can I do? There's going to be a lot more for you to do, but one thing you can do is make sure that those elected officials who have stood up for the truth, whether it's your county clerk, all the way up to your congresspeople, your senators, make sure they know that you appreciate them and you can go out and put your time and effort into helping them get reelected. And that's what we're about at the electoral level.
Well, and Joel, I want to take this to a personal level, because I think that really helps folks understand what's happening. I mean, no one has to play the violin for me. I entered this fight because I thought it was the right thing to do. But I mean, in my own case, going out against Trump forced me to flee my home, take on a full-time protective detail, as me and my family members received graphic death threats, and as people tried to hunt them down. I mean, this is real serious stuff. I mean, stuff that we had, federal authorities involved in and still involved in because of a number of credible threats. That should not happen in our politics today. I can't imagine if, during the Bush administration, Governor, you and I had both served during the Bush years, if one of us had come out and criticized President Bush, and you'd had critiques of President Bush, but I don't think in the wake of those critiques, folks were trying to hunt you down. That's not what our politics were like at the time. And so it's gotten vile, and at a grassroots level, voter to voter, as Joel said, that's how we deal with it, is a willingness to speak out. Yes, cowardice is contagious, but courage is also contagious. And when folks who feel tribeless see that there's others standing up, it's clear that there is a tribe for the tribeless. So I recognize we're getting close to time. I want to ask the governor and Joel to close us out with an optimistic note. And I want to know what you both think, what gives the two of you the most hope about not just reforming the Republican Party and having it be a responsible party in the system. What gives you hope about these ongoing efforts to protect our democracy against anti-democratic forces? What can people hang their hats on as they go through their day in the coming weeks and months to come?
Well, I have a basic faith in the American people. And I think at the end of the day, they will stand up. I mean, again, if you look at the registration numbers, so many have left the parties. They're right in the middle. They're hungry for alternative choices. They don't want to see this. They're not comfortable with this. This is not how we operate as a country. As you mentioned, we're getting into the third world status. And that's just not appreciated by a great majority, I believe, of the American people. So I have faith. I cross my fingers and hope, but that's not enough. We've got to get out there and work. And that's what we're trying to do, to give those people encouragement that you're not alone, that there are a lot of us who are standing up and going to be fighting for the right thing. And here are the candidates that will also do that. And these are the ones to give your support to in any way that you can.
Joel, we'll close with you on that.
Well, I am taken to a phrase that has really been a go-to for me, which is never confuse kindness for weakness. And I think we can have both a great kindness toward one another. We can embody what it means to overcome the kinds of divisive rhetoric. That means doing it in our own communities. And I see that in my own community. So we can start with that. We can treat each other with a basic human kindness. But we also need to have that tenacity that says we will not back down when someone is going to threaten our democracy and threaten truth. And what gives me hope along that lines is that we have millions, tens of millions of Americans who have said, I will stand up for the truth. I'll speak it out, and I'm not going to stand for this. And what we have is not only those tens of millions who are becoming more and more organized every day, but we have elected leaders who have done that, and we need to stand up with them. And they give me great courage. So when I talk to my friend Adam Kinzinger, or when I hear from some of these great other leaders who have stood up and spoken out and said, we are going to do the right thing, that gives me great courage and great hope for the future of this democracy. And we've seen that in the past. It doesn't take a huge number of people to change the course of history. And I think we've got that right now, and I'm ready to go do it.
Joel, that's a great note to end on. Joel Searby, Governor Christie Todd Whitman, thank you both so much for your time. I would urge folks, please go to renewamerica.com. Take a look at these renewer candidates, but don't just take a look, support them. You can donate to support our efforts to back these candidates. You can go to their websites and learn more about them. These are the good guys. Let's get out there and fight for the good guys. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at Renew America. You can follow us on our YouTube page. Stay in touch. And next week, we will be having a RAM chat with Lieutenant Governor of Georgia. The Lieutenant Governor is another Republican who's stuck his head out there, Jeff Duncan, to do the right thing and stand up for what's right. And I hope you'll join us for that conversation. We're looking forward to it, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much, and enjoy the day.